Well, hello everyone. My name is Reverend Charlotte. Some of you might remember that I'm the vicar of St James Church in Rawthorpe and also of Christ Church in Mould Green. I know it's been a while since I've been able to speak to you, but I'd really like to say thank you again for the beautiful pictures that you drew for me all the way back in December to put on our Advent display outside of church. They really were wonderful, and I was so grateful for your hard work. Now, normally, I would expect to be coming into school, visiting you, and during your assemblies, telling you a little bit more of the stories of Jesus. But unfortunately, as you all know by now, because of COVID, that means that I'm not able to come into school right now. So Mrs. Coates asked me whether or not instead I would make a little video for you to tell you about the Easter story. So that's what we're going to do together today. But first, I'd like to show you something, and I'd like to see if you can work out what it might be. You see, I have something here that looks very special indeed. And it is this. Now, this is sort of round, maybe a little bit more oval than round. It's wrapped up in very bright, shiny paper. It looks quite beautiful. Really very exciting. In fact, I have an idea what I think might be inside. I wonder if you have any guesses. Maybe I'll open up the paper and see if what's inside is what I think it is. Oh, that's not what I expected. I thought there would be a chocolate Easter egg in here, but it doesn't look like that. Looks quite strange, actually. Maybe if I bring it out of its paper and show you, maybe you might be able to work out what it is. I wonder if you recognize that. It's definitely not a chocolate egg, so if I'm honest, I'm feeling a little bit disappointed by that. It is brown, but it has a strange texture. It's sort of uneven and hairy. It feels rough to the touch. It's quite hard, almost like wood. Well, I'm not entirely certain what it is, but I know what it isn't. And if I'm honest, I'm feeling a little bit disappointed that it isn't a chocolate Easter egg. But I wonder if we might be able to use this to help us understand a little bit more about how the people felt at that first Easter so very long ago. You see, at that first Easter, people were expecting things to happen in a certain way. Many of them believed that Jesus was a very special person who had been sent from God, and they'd been waiting for him for a very long time. They called Jesus by the name Messiah because they thought that Jesus would save them. They thought that Jesus would save them from the Roman Empire, who were in charge of the people at that time, and sadly often were very cruel. So they thought that a Messiah would save them from this empire by being a soldier and fighting against the Roman Empire to free the people and to rule them in a kinder, gentler way. None of them expected that Jesus would ride into Jerusalem on a lowly donkey. After all, what kind of king rides on a donkey? But then they remembered that long ago one of their prophets had said, "Shout and cheer, O Jerusalem, your king is coming, a good king who makes all things right." A humble king riding on a donkey, a mere colt of a donkey. Then they thought again about what they were expecting, and they wondered if Jesus really was their new king after all. In those days, when people had been outside walking, their feet were dusty and dirty because they all wore sandals. So as soon as they entered somebody's home, a servant, a person who was the least important out of everybody, would take a bowl and a cloth and they would pour a few drops of water into the bowl, and then they would kneel down and wash the people's feet. But that first Easter, instead of a lowly servant, it was in fact Jesus who washed his friends' feet. Peter, one of Jesus' friends, was so shocked by what he was doing that he exclaimed, "Master, you're not going to wash my feet ever." But Jesus replied, "If you don't allow me to wash you, then you will never understand or truly be a part of what I am doing." Peter, who desperately wanted to follow Jesus, replied, "Master, then don't just wash my feet, wash my hands, wash my head." Even though they hadn't expected it, Peter and his friends then allowed Jesus to wash their feet. Jesus' friends expected to have dinner with him that night, but they didn't expect for Jesus to turn their meal into a very serious moment when he took a loaf of bread, held it up, and broke it, saying, "This bread represents my body, and it will be broken for you." And this wine represents my blood, and it will be shed for you. Every time you meet together, do this to remember me. This wasn't what they expected, but they knew it was important. The people who believed that Jesus was their king definitely didn't expect for Jesus to be crucified on top of a hill and to die in a horrible way. When they saw Jesus' body wrapped in grave clothes, and put into a tomb, they expected they had been wrong about Jesus, and this story of someone who would save them was all over. But they also didn't expect that 3 days later, the tomb would suddenly, amazingly, be opened. And the grave clothes would be empty because Jesus was gone. In the end, they discovered that even though nothing had happened as they thought it would, something amazing was indeed happening, because they saw that Jesus was alive once again. And then they knew that even though Jesus wasn't the sort of king that they'd been expecting, he had definitely been sent by God. So the next time you see something that looks a little bit like this, wrapped in a very special, shiny covering like this, remember that God rarely does things in the way we expect will be done. But when God gives us gifts, just like he did on that first Easter day, then it always turns out to be something very special indeed. So let's pray. Dear Jesus, this Easter, when we open our beautiful, shiny Easter eggs, help us to remember that the two halves of that egg remind us that you died for us and then rose again. And when we find a special toy or sweet inside our eggs, help us to remember, just like the gift of you in that tomb a long time ago, that those sweets and treats inside our Easter eggs remind us of you and of what you did to save us. Please keep us safe this Easter and every Easter. And please help us to enjoy special time with those that we love. And above all, to remember that you love us more than anyone else. Happy Easter, everyone.